Great. Okay, so it's my pleasure now to introduce Alison Williams. So Alison Williams is a person with Parkinson's disease. She's an author, a scholar, an athlete, and also a presenter. So you're going to hear from Alison, also a WPC finalist in Barcelona. So welcome, Alison.
Thank you. Today I'm going to talk about emotion, about stories, about paradoxes, about research, about lived experience. But first of all, I want to thank NECTAR and Cure Parkinson's Trust and Blue Rock and all the other conference supporters for the chance to let you know just how much we in the Parkinson's community... Sorry? Oh. No, but no. Thank you. No, that's okay. But I just wanted to say how much we in the Parkinson's community are excited by the research that you and your colleagues across the world are doing. We follow it closely through things like the research interest groups and events like the annual Parkinson's lecture. That's attended and watched by over 1,000 people across the world and has been given by luminaries like Patrick Brandon and Roger Barker and Bastian Bloom. And I want to thank the NECTAR organisers for the chance to bring the patient's perspective to the table and to do so in this wonderful and extraordinary city and this oasis of calm and coffee and cakes. So I live in a paradox. I hold two opposing ideas in mind at the same time. I live in hope that a cure for Parkinson's will be found in my lifetime, and at the same time I live as if this is not going to happen. So the implications of this paradox are profound. If I live only in the hope that a cure will be found, then I live a life of passive waiting. However, if I live as if no cure will be found in my lifetime, I have a choice. I can either turn my face to the wall and give up, or I can choose to focus on what can be done, what I can do to modify my Parkinson's. And as I'm sure you've already noticed, I live in both scenarios, hence the paradox. I continue to live in a hope for a cure in my lifetime, and at the same time live in the realistic expectation that it won't happen, but if it does, it probably won't get approved in time for me to benefit from it. I've been involved with research for much of my 11 and a bit years with Parkinson's, and only now have I finally begun to understand the difference between cure and disease-modifying therapies. There's various kinds of disease-modifying therapies, as you know. The drugs, obviously, the levodopa that replaces the lost dopamine, the agonists that trick my brain and mimic how dopamine works, surgery, deep brain stimulation and focus ultrasound, and now stem cell replacement, the amazing and hopeful work that we've been hearing about over the past couple of days. And I work with another disease-modifying therapy, lifestyle changes. Because Parkinson's, as you've been hearing from quite a few of the other speakers, isn't just a paradoxical condition, it's a complex one. It's not only a disease of the brain, but it's a disease of the whole body. It has over 40 different motor and non-motor symptoms. And we, people with Parkinson's, call it a boutique disease. No two people are the same. And it's a truism to say that when you've met one person with Parkinson's, you've met one person with Parkinson's. But this matters, especially in research. Camille Carroll, in her 2023 Edinburgh Parkinson's lecture, touched on the negative clinical implications for underserved groups when trial populations are not representative of gender, of ethnicity, of socioeconomic groups, or age at onset. Just take a moment to imagine yourself as a young onset Parkinson's woman with small children, whose medication stops working when you menstruate. As the activist Omatola Thomas puts it, we all know our medication only works 3 weeks out of 4. Parkinson's is also a disease of the mind, of the spirit, of the emotional heart. So the changes I make are not just physical, but emotional and social and spiritual. I create my own life. And the best way I personally have found of tackling Parkinson's complexity is through narrative, through stories. Once upon a time, or as you say here, I'll try and get the pronunciation right, C'era una volta. Arthur W. Frank is a storyteller. He's an academic psychologist, a cancer survivor who writes about 3 narratives of illness: restitution, chaos, and quest. In restitution stories, the doctor restores the patient to health, medicine operates through drugs or surgery, and restitution works. The antibiotic kills the bacteria, the tumour is excised, the cataracts removed, and I'll always be grateful to restitution medicine for saving my daughter's life when she got meningitis at the age of 12. But for the person with Parkinson's, for me, the restitution narrative is irrelevant. Restitution stories don't work when a condition is chronic and progressive. For me, right now, today, there is no restitution. There's no permanent replacing of the more than 60% of my lost dopaminergic cells, no restoring my compromised brain pathways, no unfolding my folded up alpha-synucleins. And Ellis talked a bit about some of the symptoms yesterday. For me, there's no stopping the dissies and the braddies, the dyskinesia, the weaving to and fro caused by the dopamine medication. And you saw that very clearly on that clip of Tom Isaacs yesterday. The dystonia that can make my muscles painfully hypertonic and my toes curl under. The dysautonomia that gives me problems of bladder and bowel, loss of sense of smell, weird dreams that I act out. My poor long-suffering husband has been woken up not just by my laughing, but by my sinking my teeth into his shoulders. And I once woke myself up by biting my own knuckle joints. It's very painful. There's the braddies, the bradykinesia that can slow or even halt my walking. And most scary of all, the bradyphrenia that fills my brain with mud and steals my words. And this is where the paradox deepens. What I have is called Parkinson's disease, but I tell people I have a condition. I'm not ill. And I can't remember when I last used restitution medicine because I'm generally very healthy. I use a form of it 3 times a day when I take my medication, and I'm deeply grateful every time I do. But it only lasts about 4 hours, and over time will be less and less effective and have more and more side effects. Frank then talks about the chaos story, where people are sucked into the craziness of illness and the disasters that go with it. In Parkinson's, it's often the families and carers who suffer the chaos story most, especially when the person with Parkinson's slips into dementia, or the often misunderstood or sometimes even dismissed Parkinson's psychosis. I steer clear of the chaos narrative. But when I went through the draft version of this presentation with my daughter and my husband, they both said, "You've skipped over the chaos story. Why? Why have you ducked it?" I tried to tell them that it was because I hadn't personally experienced it. "Well, maybe not," said my daughter, "but it sits in the back of my head all the time, knowing there's a significant risk of you getting Parkinson's dementia." "Yes," said my husband, "it sits in my head too." And I've had to admit to them, and most importantly to myself, that Parkinson's dementia and the chaos narrative that inevitably goes with it, for me as well as for them, is part of my possible future reality, and that is seriously scary. So right now, I choose the quest narrative. A quest powered by curiosity, because Parkinson's is a weird and fascinating condition. Quest stories, says Frank, meet illness head-on. They try to use it. He said of his cancer, "Time spent being ill ceased to be time taken away from my life. Instead, how I lived with illness became the measure of how well I could craft a life, whether I was ill or healthy. I craft my life. I use disease-modifying activities to slow the condition's progress, particularly intense physical and cognitive exercise. Mondays, I take a class in Latin dance. It's called Mature Latin Movers. It's absolutely wonderful. And in the evening, I take a class in Japanese taiko drumming. Tuesday is Tai Chi with weapons. I'm learning the straight sword at the moment, and my latest move is called Cut Off 1,000 Heads. 1, 2, 3. Wednesday is Pilates. Thursday is a gym session with a personal trainer. Saturday is table tennis. And every day I walk 10,000 steps if I can. Not difficult in Naples. I link up with other people with Parkinson's. I co-founded the Quality of Life group for people with Parkinson's only, where we can talk freely without worrying anyone or censoring ourselves, where we can exchange vital information, like where all the public toilets are, and what foods help with constipation, and helping each other build a sense of community and friendship. I'm an artist. I think you missed that one out, Tilo. I work in my studio, and I find that the flow that I experience there helps to keep my brain clear. And I make sure to spend time with my friends and my family, and to do research. I'm a patient representative in the Euro GCT project, and I do lay reviewing for Parkinson's UK grant research applications. I've had posters in each of the last 3 World Parkinson's Congresses, and a paper published in the Journal of Regenerative Medicine, co-authored with Bill Wright and the much-missed late Ken Bowler, both people with Parkinson's. And here we have another paradox. I live my fullest life in the quest narrative, and you all, as researchers, are working incredibly hard in the restitution narrative. The last 3 letters of NECTAR stand for transplantation and restoration. And for me and my fellow people with Parkinson's, the work that you are doing towards the restitution, the restoration of health, is the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Slowing Parkinson's, stopping it in its tracks, wonder of wonders, curing it. It's estimated in 2020 there were 175,972 people with Parkinson's in Italy, and over 10 million people living with Parkinson's worldwide, and more than 158,000 people in the UK. And as populations grow older, the numbers are steadily going up. And can you imagine the impact that your work will have on all those lives? And it's not just the people living with Parkinson's, it's the lives of the people who love us, who care for us, who look after us. For every one person with Parkinson's, there are at least 3 other people whose lives are directly affected, whose health, mental as well as physical, is compromised. And that's a lot of people and a lot of emotion bound up in the whole Parkinson's community. I said at the beginning I wanted to speak about emotion, and I've spoken about my own and my family's emotion and the emotion of the 10 million people globally. But now I want to talk about your emotion in the lab. In 2013, Professor Wendy Neustetter and her colleagues in Georgia Tech published Science as Psychology, their study of what made for successful research in biomedical labs that focused on innovation, like yours. And when they analysed their data, as well as the clusters they had expected around problem solving and learning and so forth, they had a whole heap of other data that didn't fit any of these categories. And they discovered, to their great surprise, that many of these extra data were about emotion, about feelings. And they found a very clear connection between emotion and motivation. And it took me right back to experiences I have had when talking to researchers. I remember telling one researcher just how important her work was to me as a person with Parkinson's, and she started to cry. I never knew how much my work mattered, she said. And Chiara talked about this yesterday as well. And this has happened time and again since then, not necessarily with the tears, but with the emotion and with renewed motivation and engagement, because your work does matter. And then there was the next surprise. The cells they were working with also felt emotions. Neustetter's study has a whole section called Anthropomorphizing Expressions, Happy Cells. And the researchers in the labs talked about the cells as if they were people. They said things like, a lone cell by itself is not very happy. And so the cells are feeling and touching and probing around in their environment until they find the right partners to form a network with. They have a lot in common, but each dish has its own personality. And Madeline talked about this yesterday, about keeping the cells happy. The study's author talked about cognitive partnering, working cooperatively with the cells themselves. But what happens when researchers, when you, create cognitive partnerships, not just with the cells you're working with, not just with each other and other researchers in labs across the world, but with people with Parkinson's, people whose well-being and whose future you hold in your hands? Cure Parkinson's Trust talks about, if I can get over the page, Cure Parkinson's Trust talks about the greater value in research gained from working with people with Parkinson's in this quest for a cure, involving the underserved groups, as we said earlier. Your work matters. And what happens when people, well, when all of us, open our minds to curiosity? Isaac Asimov, the science fiction writer, said that the most exciting phrase to hear in science, the one that signals new discoveries, is not eureka, but, that's funny. And one striking example of this is what happened when Thilo talked to Perdita Barron in Manchester University about a meeting that he had had with Joy Milne, and they said, that's funny. Someone who can smell Parkinson's. And this developed into a partnership between Joy, who had been a carer for her husband, and the Barron group, and the result is a biomarker, a non-invasive, over 97% accurate swab test for Parkinson's in its prodromal phase, long before any motor symptoms appear. And one last story. Once upon a time, an unwanted and uninvited visitor turned up in my life and wouldn't go away. Parkinson's, the visitor was called. I tried everything: denial, sulks and bad temper, pretending nothing was wrong, but nothing worked. And then a good girlfriend took me to one side and said, "Look, Alison," she said, "my aunt has had Parkinson's for 18 years. She plays badminton 3 times a week. Get over yourself." And that's when I woke up. That's when I realized that I was responsible for my own wellness, that the restitution narrative wouldn't work for me, but the quest narrative could. The unwanted visitor has also brought gifts. I've been part of an installation artwork with my Parkinson's smell distilled to 100% proof in a tiny little bottle. I've had the extraordinary privilege of visiting the brain bank and seeing a donated brain dissected. Without Parkinson's, I wouldn't be here, learning about the latest cutting-edge research. I wouldn't have discovered my capacity for speaking in public and the joy of trying new things. And you see before you the proud winner of the 2023 Scottish Parkinson's Table Tennis Ladies Single Bronze Medal, 2nd class. So here I am, living with the paradox, hoping for a cure, getting on with living a full life without one, meeting extraordinary people like you and like the wonderful Thilo, people who are working on helping me and the rest of the 10 million people plus in the world living with the paradox that is Parkinson's, people who are figuring out how to say to the unwanted visitor, "Thanks for the gifts, and now it's time to say goodbye, adieu, abshir, sayonara, and of course, adio. And from the bottom of my heart, thank you."
Do we have time for a few comments or questions? I think we do, yeah. And Alison, of course, will be around all day, gala dinner, right?
Sorry?
Yeah, you'll be around all day and at the gala dinner
Yes,
tonight,
yes.
so you'll
And
be
at
able
supper tonight.
and
And at dinner tonight.
tonight, yeah, for sure, yeah. So, any questions or comments or feelings?
Alison, thank you very much for this touching and beautiful speech. I think, as I said before, this is very important for us scientists, even for us more fundamental scientists, for the young people, because you are so inspirational. we need to hear more about these talks, about interacting more with patients, even if we just look at our nice cells in culture, because they mean a lot for you, and you mean a lot for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I want to give this little...
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Coffee time. Yeah, Alison says coffee time. Please chat with Alison outside. Thank you very much. Thank you.